this story that one single Chinese spy has been using multiple LinkedIn profiles to try to lure thousands of British officials to hand over state secrets in exchange for large sums of money and lucrative business deals. This was broken exclusively by The Times today. The intelligence officer for Beijing's main spy agency created a string of aliases and fake companies to target security officials, civil servants, scientists and academics with access to classified information or commercially sensitive technology. Well, he's been a busy boy, hasn't he? Western security services believe the operative, whose main alias is Robin Zhang. Have you been contacted by Robin Zhang? If you have, let me know. They believe he is the most prolific spy for a hostile state working against British interests in a generation without even having to leave his mother's basement. Well, somebody who may well have been contacted by Robin Zhang, and one of his aliases is Towler, who's an international political strategist. He's worked on various and many domestic and international political campaigns, no least, of course, as a Brexiteer. And Gawain, you had an incident where you were sort of contacted, or someone attempted to lure you with the promise of work from China.
Yeah. Like many of us who were involved in the referendum, post the result, life became somewhat more complicated, somewhat more difficult to earn. We were never going to be forgiven. So I'm footling around on universal credit and trying to get work. I have found that it is easier to find work abroad through foreign interests than it is to find work in the UK. So it's not that unusual that somebody gets in touch. And yes, they got in touch through LinkedIn. My chap was called Kevin, but this was just over 5 years ago. And I see that the article suggests that this has been going over 5 years. So I'm either one of the earlier ones or it's been going on longer.
I mean, what sort of thing did Kevin message you? What was he offering? What did he want in return?
Well, he basically, initially, it was just a question of, he looked at my profile, and I was, at that time, well known in Whitehall. I knew a lot of SPADs closely. I knew a fair number of ministers. I certainly knew the lobby very well indeed. And I'm a reasonably personable sort of chap and got on with people. So that was basically me and the options that I provided. And so he was saying he was... he represented a number of Chinese and Hong Kong-based companies who wanted to do business with the UK. And though I have caution about China, I have absolutely no caution about trade. I've always believed in that Britain should trade with the world and defend itself as best it can. So that was where we were at. So it wasn't that odd. It wasn't that weird. And blowing my own trumpet, at the time, I was very well connected in Whitehall. And in the public affairs world, I would be a good person to speak to. So it didn't feel completely out there. It wasn't so random as to be ridiculous.
So what happened after that? You know, old Kevin Beijing gets in touch and says, "Yo, Gawain, we got some work for you. Are you interested in taking it up?" And you're thinking, well maybe. Do you get back in touch with a CV?
Initially, he gets in chat. We chat for a month or so. He asks me various questions, sort of, what sort of people do you know in Whitehall? He gives a broad idea of the sort of thing that he'd be interested in, some early warning on legislation, attitudes to certain things, particularly Belt and Road and Chinese interest in Africa and elsewhere, and Britain's commercial response to that. And I basically, a lot of this, if you know how Whitehall works and if you know how that thing works, then there's a lot of stuff hidden in plain sight. That a foreign company wouldn't know how to access, wouldn't know how to know. But it's nothing untoward. It's just you wouldn't know how to find it. And I did know at that point, particularly, I knew very well where the index was. And so if somebody was prepared to get me off universal credit, then that seemed good to me.
So what happened? You didn't take a job with our friend Kev,
first,
evidently.
After a month or so, they basically said, look, there's 5 or 6 different companies. It would make sense if I was to do the interview with them, come along to Hong Kong. Well, I mean, I was signing on once every 2 weeks, so I got in touch with my universal credit advisor, said, look, do you mind? I'm going to go to Hong Kong and do some interviews for a few days. So they flew me out to Hong Kong, put me up in a 5-star hotel, and proceeded to spend 3-4 days, or 3 days particularly, I had 1 day off, talking to me, going through. Initially, it was commercial, day one, the sort of things that the companies they'd be talking about, and they were a variety of industrial and otherwise firms that he was talking about. But by day two, it became clear that what they were interested in was things that were not necessarily available in the public domain. But the entertaining thing, it was sort of 7:30 in the morning, started, and then Michelin-starred meal for lunch, then full work afternoon, and then Michelin-starred meal for dinner, and then start again the next day. It was very nice, to be fair, but the questions became far more insistent. And then on the third or the last day, a chap from Peking, supposedly President Xi's European advisor, turned up in this room. Now, I had, in a joke before I left with a former colleague, I had mentioned I was going over there. And though I didn't think anything of it, we joked about the idea that it could be something like this. And then it became extremely clear that, yes, what they wanted wasn't necessarily stuff that's in the public domain, but stuff that had yet to be published,
so you're
yet to come out.
You're fairly certain and resolute that this wasn't just essentially sort of Chinese chambers of commerce or a trade body looking to expand their influence, which a lot of countries do, but some sort of state-sponsored actor who wanted espionage services.
I mean, basically, I'd been advised, don't do it in a hotel room, Gwen. Nothing you can do about that. Sure enough, here I am sitting in a hotel on the 17th floor of this slightly seedy hotel on the island of Victoria, with this chap, quite a scare. Well, the two people I was with, and had been for the last couple of days, were obviously very deferent and very worried and scared by this chap who turned up. He clearly spoke English, but everything was done through translation. Telephones were out of the room, or had to stay out of the room, and he was extremely insistent that what had to happen was I had to be able to use my contacts, the SPADs I knew, to be able to get information on Britain's interests and vis-a-vis China and vis-a-vis trade, that I would send them. Now, I was, internally, I was saying, you haven't looked at my CV, have you? I was prepared to ruin my career and my domestic life and my finances in order to fight for Britain to get its independence from the European Union. I wasn't going to start betraying it now, not for anybody's money. But I'm sitting in this hotel room, so frankly, I'm going to nod and say yes, in Hong Kong, which I proceeded to do. I signed a confidentiality agreement. Yeah, right. And the most interesting thing, when this fellow disappeared off, I was given a top-of-the-range phone, and I was told that what I had to do, I was interested, I like photographs, I use Instagram. What you do is you take a photograph through this app that he showed me.
Right.
And then you upload a document into the photograph, you post that photograph onto Instagram, and they can download the photograph at their end from Instagram and get the document out of it.
Wow, so you'd essentially be using the cover of an Instagram account to photograph classified information should you ever chance upon it and make sure it ends up back at the CCP headquarters in Beijing.
Yeah.
What sort of money were they offering and how did you get yourself out of this?
Well, basically, that evening I had the flight back, and as I left the hotel, I was given an envelope with 6,000 used euros in it, and I was told that for the first few months, I would not be expected to come up with anything confidential, but I would be paid about £1,000 a pop for reports on individuals from publicly available documents to show that I was capable of writing a report to their specifications 2 or 3 times a month. And I said, yes, no problem at all. And so I got myself onto a plane and flew back to Heathrow and got off the plane and went, oh, my giddy aunt. Apart from the fact there was no honey trap, which was slightly disappointing. Because, I mean,
it's 3:30 in the afternoon, Gawain. 3:30 in the afternoon. So did you then report this to the powers that be?
I did mention it to a friend of mine who works for those that should not be named, and nothing happened until then. Then the Barry Gardner story came up, where he'd been receiving 500,000 from a Chinese agent of influence, and I thought, well, if it is the case that the Chinese authorities or the Chinese people are prepared to pay an MP 500 grand, and they're prepared to give me 6,000 to cover expenses plus 1,000 2 or 3 times a month, they're probably using a blunderbuss approach. I've not heard of this anywhere. So I went ahead and published back in March last year, what happened to me, because I don't believe I'm the only one.
Oh, definitely. Hardly, Gawain. I'm sorry that you can't feel special in this.
No, absolutely not. But absolutely not. But the point is, I said no.
Yeah, no, I'm glad.
I turned it down.
You did.
Admittedly, I did pay off 3 months back rent.
Well, that's good.
For
I mean,
6,000.
You know,
and I received a bunch of messages from the chap over the next few months, and then he stopped contacting me when I didn't respond.
And there was no sort of threatening behaviour, nothing like that? There was
nothing threatening, no.
Feel like you're still tracked or monitored, or is it just sort of like a close call with...
I'm never going to go back to Hong Kong or China again. They were suggesting I come back to Kowloon or Peking next time I visited in a few months' time. No.
Yeah, but you're probably on some sort of list somewhere precluding you entry anyway. Gawain, it was so fascinating to hear your story, and it's a fascinating story overall. Not surprising, though, is it? The fact that the Chinese are using LinkedIn and all sorts to build guanxi, as they call it, I believe, in Cantonese, which is networks. I mean, spying is as old as politics, isn't it? And I'm sure espionage goes on all the time, but it could happen to, well, almost any of us. So be on your guard.